Hey everybody, I'm Zale Mednick and welcome to another episode of Preconceived. If you're enjoying these episodes, please rate and review it on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or whatever podcasting platform you listen to. It really helps spread word of the show and allow us to keep producing these episodes. We're also now publishing a lot of these episodes on our YouTube channel. So if you look up Preconceived Podcast on YouTube and you prefer to watch your podcasts as opposed to listen to them, or you like a combination of both, please subscribe to our YouTube channel and watch the videos there. The search for romantic love is a journey many of us choose to go on. Phrases like finding the one and meant to be are common adages when one seeks to find the quote-unquote perfect partner. But as we know, life is not a fairy tale, nor is it a Hollywood rom-com. And the search for love didn't always look the same way as it does today. There was a time, not long ago, when romance and attraction didn't factor in as much in the decision to get married. Marriage was a more practical thing, not necessarily predicated on our idea of modern love. To many, that probably seems strange. But how strange is it? Is our conception of modern love a good thing? Or does it ultimately set many of us up for disappointment? What can we learn from other communities where marriage is not based on love, where marriages are arranged, and love is perhaps something that is thought to develop after the two partners have been wed? Is that perhaps a more practical model for lasting love? I'm joined today by Pamela Regan, who's spoken about this topic. She's a social psychologist and statistician. Her primary research interest is in the area of close relationships, specifically romantic relationships. She's particularly interested in attraction, desire, passion, love, and related phenomena. She approaches research questions from both the social, psychological, and evolutionary perspective. She's an active scientist and scholar and has published a number of peer-reviewed journal articles, chapters, and encyclopedia entries and books. All right, Pamela Regan, welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
The conception of modern love is based on this idea of romance, of, like I said in the introduction, finding the one. And those are things that really drive people when they're looking for a romantic partner. I'm curious to start, how do you think most people look at love right now? When you think of modern love in the 21st century, what do you think of? How do you define that or describe that? Not necessarily what it should be, and there's no shoulds, but how that's perceived by most people.
I think that's a really great question. And I think if you ask a lot of people on the street, particularly in industrialized, sort of urban Western populations, you will get an answer that really does resemble sort of the Hollywood romantic vision, that heavy on romance and passion and finding your soulmate and true love you'll know it when you find it, and it will be perfect, and it will overcome all obstacles. And this is really what we call it's romanticism. It's the romantic ideal. And it's actually something that can be measured because some groups score higher on it than others. Teenage boys are particularly romantic, which is, I think, a quite lovely and interesting finding. But it also is fairly unrealistic. And yet I believe that that is certainly what the media, and certainly because are consumers of media, what I think a lot of us have come to accept and embrace as the way you love. That is what love is, when we know that there is no one right way to love. And there are, in fact, multiple ways of loving.
I love that you kind of started there with the idea of multiple ways of loving. I was having a conversation with a couple friends recently, one of whom has been given different advice about her relationship and whether or not she should be in it, going back and forth on it. And one thing that I said to her, and maybe this was bad advice, but I said, throughout my, I was going to say, course of finding love, I'm married now, but I felt, or I came to realize a little later in life that advice in general is dangerous because when people give you advice, they're giving it from their perspective, right? And you often are told, like, I would give the advice to somebody that I would want to get myself. But when you describe multiple ways of loving, the reality is everybody's different. So what is viable for some person in terms of what love looks for them, that's based on their personality, and that might not be the right way for somebody else to love. I mean, this romanticized version of love. I actually believe that some people listening to this probably say, yeah, I experienced that. and they say, "You know what? There is the one. I found the one, and it's great." But there are other people where just based on their personalities, that isn't gonna happen. And do you think that there's kind of this discordance that you've got some people who found it, and they're telling the people in their lives, in addition to Hollywood, "I found it, then you should, and anything less than that is settling."
Yes, I think so. I think that's such a really interesting point. And I think most of us, so I believe my own perspective has changed both as a person, as I've grown and had more relationships and come to different realizations, but also as a scientist, because started my career really focusing on passionate love, which is that romantic experience. And that is sort of what we mean when we say I'm falling in love. It is a fall into love. It is a jumping off the cliff into love. And that was sort of where I worked with Ellen Berscheid, who really founded the field of close relationship science and also was one of the first scientists to study that type of love. So my focus was very much on that. And it was really only over time as a researcher and also as a person that I realized not everyone experiences that. And when you give primacy to that, what you're saying is anyone who doesn't experience this is settling, is having a lesser than experience. And that is simply not true. That is simply not true. There are people who do not fall into love the way we think about falling into love. Our eyes met across the crowded room, and I was struck by lightning, and I knew he's the one, she's the one. Not everyone experiences that, and that's actually okay because that's probably fairly uncommon. So if you found it and you felt it, wonderful. You have experienced what we call passionate love or erotic love. You may be prone to experience that. My sister, classic erotic or passionate lover. Me, not so much. That's okay. I have friends who gradually came to realize that they were in love with this other person. They waded slowly into love. They didn't jump off the cliff, but they gradually, over time, intermingled their lives together and developed this deep, solid, friendship based, respect based, trust based relationship. That is an equally valid way of loving, and it is no less valuable or viable. And in fact, it may be more predictive of relational well being, quite frankly, than falling passionately, madly, crazy in love. Not everyone has to be crazy in love for it to be love. So I love that advice that you gave to your friend, which is, hey, there are what is good for one person is not necessarily good or true or accurate for another. And let's please stop giving primacy to one variety over another. Let's please stop doing that, because if you told me you won't be happy until you experience that lightning moment, I would think there was something wrong with my relationship or my approach or my way of being in romantic relationships. And there just isn't. I just don't love that way. I love in a different way. And that's okay. Probably what's most important is finding someone whose approach matches yours.
That's really, really eloquently said. To play devil's advocate, because I know there are people listening to this who might say, "Hey, but," um, you said there's people who don't necessarily fall into love. Not everyone experiences that passionate or erotic love, like your sister, for example. Somebody who does experience it would say to the person who maybe doesn't experience it, "Well, that's because you haven't looked hard enough yet. That's because you gotta keep looking. That means you haven't found it because anybody can experience that if they look hard enough." Are you saying that some people's, I guess this is what I said before, some people's personalities just aren't necessarily wired that way, where it's not necessarily, you didn't look hard enough, you settled, it's more just that's not the way some people's personalities operate, that's not the way some people interact with other people because the way they develop a connection is more slow, where it's less about that erotic love.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would broaden it beyond personality, because the reality is we do have not everyone has a characteristic approach to loving. And here I'm really talking about the theory that came to us from sociologist John Lee. And it's a very nice theory. It really Doesn't capture all people, so I want to preface what I'm saying with that. But some people we know from research, and certainly my own research, have a characteristic way of thinking, feeling, acting, responding in their adult romantic relationships. And those people have what we call a love style or a love approach. And this really is almost a dispositional tendency, akin to something that might be thought of as a personality characteristic, although I typically don't like to use that because it makes it so intra-individual when we know that our understandings and approaches to love are also affected by our upbringing, by the culture in which we live, by the environment in which we live, and so on. But for those people who have a characteristic approach, research tells us that not when we administer the scales we have to assess these approaches, we know that not everyone shows erotic. Not everyone shows passionate love. There are sizable numbers of people whose approach is what we call companionate or storgic, which is an affection-based, calmer. I like to get to know someone for a bit before I enter a relationship with them. The passionate lover would never say that. They would say, "Oh no, I knew as soon as our eyes met, I knew." Different approaches equally valid. And so I understand that the passionate lover might say, "But you'll feel what I feel as soon as you find the right person." That in and of itself is a sign of a passionate lover because they are emotional. They are intense. They are comfortable with that. Not everyone is comfortable jumping off that cliff, and that's okay. And we all know that because we all have friends, we all have family members who are very emotionally expressive and others who are not. And being expressive versus being not, there's no value judgment placed on that. And so I understand the desire to say, but this is the right way. And it's so wonderful what I'm feeling that I want to give it to you. I want to share it with you. I want you to have that. But what it does is negate the reality and the value of the other person's experience because they might turn around and equally say, but I'd like you to have what I have, which is this warm, comfortable experience that is strong and sturdy and weathers changes in desire and emotion and is sturdy, not fragile, because passionate love is fragile. It is that high cannot last forever. Doesn't mean you leave the relationship, doesn't mean you leave the partner, but haven't we all felt that? I have. Like, where did the, "Oh, he walked in the room and my my heart jumped." Where did that go? And is it wrong that it went? It's not wrong that it went. It's a function of physiological arousal and the fact that our bodies cannot sustain that high forever. So I understand what the passionate lovers want to share, and I think it's beautiful that they want to share that. But I also think they need to acknowledge, we all need to acknowledge that there are different ways of loving. And how wonderful is that? This diversity of ways of finding true love. They're all true love.